Hey everyone, I'm Vince Siu. I'm the founder and CEO of Press Start Academy. I'm here to talk today about gamifying the learning experience. The talk is titled Play, Learn, Grow. We'll come back to this topic by the end of the session. So, a quick word on what we do here at Press Start Academy. So, we're reimagining learning through play and games. We're very excited because every day we go into the studio, we're designing new, unique, multidisciplinary curriculum. We basically get to play around all day and really think about what it means to, you know, uh, design learning experiences from the ground up, where game-based learning, gamification, learning through play, all of these adjacent concepts are at the core of what we do. Of course, what we want to also do is make sure that the fun time is also a productive time. So we are all tethered to academic standards, and we're also developing a proprietary whole person development and assessment framework so that we get the best of all worlds. So, quick word, gamification. We always hear about this topic. We always hear about this concept, games, play, all of these things. What exactly is gamification? Well, traditionally speaking, gamification is the use of game-like elements and game design techniques in non-game contexts, right? So, we actually see this a lot in our everyday lives, right? Loyalty programs, right? Gym memberships, a lot of those things, right? You're accumulating points, you're earning badges, you're shooting for achievements and things like that. Otherwise, the activity might not really be that enjoyable, but things like this make that process of participating and engaging more incentivized for us, right? So we're taking concepts that we see a lot from games, online games, board games, whatever, and we apply them into business contexts. More and more, we are seeing that seep into education. So now that we've talked about gamification, let's talk about games in education. So for us at Press Start Academy, we actually see games in education across two um, different options and two different spectrums, right? The first thing is called educational games. Now, here are two games that I grew up playing a lot. Maybe some of you might recognize these games. That might give a little indication as to how old I actually am. But these are, quintessential what we call edutainment games, right? So educational games here. Super Solvers outnumbered, and there's Math Blaster Episode 1 in Search Your Spot. As you can see, both are math games. Lots of fun. We spent hours playing on it. In school, what happened was, the bell would ring and they'd be like, class is over, and why don't we go play Math Blaster, or we can, fool around on Super Solvers and other games like that. And that was all good and that was all cool because principals and teachers know that these games are meant to be educational. Now, what do we mean in this case by educational, right? Why are parents and why are teachers okay with giving games like this to students to play? Well, it's very simple. When you look at the screen and you see all sorts of mathematical symbols, you see the different operations and whatnot. Basically, on the back end, at the end of each game session, you're able to generate assessment. So, we kind of slightly, in a derogatory form, call this a more colorful, fancy version of homework, because that's really kind of what it is, right? School's over, class over. Now it's time to do homework, except homework looks like a cartoon, which is great. It makes the learning process more fun, but we call this educational games because the education piece comes first. Now, the second thing, also other games that I grew up with, these are what we call games that educate, right? And obviously, this is slightly more complex than the games that I showed on the previous screen. SimCity 3000, spent hundreds of hours playing that. Civilization 4, I'm still playing Civilization 6 these days. Now, why do we call them games that educate? Well, the simple answer or the simple analogy here that I would give is that I've not met a single person who's played SimCity to learn about urban planning, but I've met countless of architects and landscape designers and urban planners who are in this profession right now because they grew up playing SimCity. right? So it is a game environment that compels you to learn more about a topic, to develop mastery over a particular set of concepts, um, all while being intrinsically motivated to do well at the game, right? In order to do well at SimCity, where in a sandbox environment, there isn't really like a set goal for you to achieve. What constitutes a great city that you want to build? Does it have a lot of urban density? Does it have really cool sort of landscapes? Does it have a really nice mix between renewable energy and urban greenery and things like that? Well, we got to understand all those concepts first. We got to understand where the pollution comes from. We got to build waste networks. We got to build public transport networks. We got to build utilities networks, and all of those things, police coverage, fire coverage, healthcare coverage, all of those things that are inherent to our understanding of how a city functions. But none of this is being presented to us in a way where we are being assessed, right? This is not homework. This is simply things that we need to do in order for us to do better inside the game. So we're having fun and we're kind of subconsciously, unconsciously learning in the process. That's why we call it a game that educates. It's because it is a game first. So there's a lot of things, right? Games and education, educational games and games that educate. Now, hopefully by this point, judging from how I'm speaking about the topic, you can get a sense that we at Press Start Academy, we are aiming for more of a games that educate type of segment. So for us, when we're thinking about gamification, we're kind of taking it to the next level a little bit. So, the corny term, gamification 2.0, basically to us, that's what drives us. We want to build fun first. Then everything else comes pretty naturally around that, right? Because the most important thing in a fun environment is that everybody is immersed in it. Everybody feels like they want to stay in that experience. And therefore, they're willing to do more things to push that experience forward and see where that exploration goes. Cool. So gamification for us built fun first. So how do we gamify learning, right? And specifically so that learning can be fun first, right? There's a lot of those educational games that I was speaking about, more colorful versions of homework, cartoony versions of exercises. That's all great. How do we push the boundary a little bit more? And how can you guys also do the same? So I want to touch on this concept of agency. At this point, I think a lot of people have been talking about this, but agency dictionary definition is the capacity, condition, or state of acting or exerting power. So basically, it translates to how in control do you feel over where you are right now, right? That's agency. Now, in the concept or in the context of games, the idea of agency is actually super important, right? You want to feel as a player that you are somewhat, at least, in charge of the state of play. So here we draw a lot of inspiration actually from classic role-playing games, whether they're tabletop, whether they're digital, doesn't really matter because the entire ethos of designing a role-playing game is actually for you to play a role in the game, right? So, some of you might have heard of Dungeons and Dragons before, the quintessential classic tabletop role-playing game. As you can see, it's played in person as a social sort of interactive session. You have a dungeon master who's in charge of narrating the story. But the cool part of this is that all the players are in charge of what they are supposed to do. They have a character in front of them, and they are basically in charge of what decisions they're going to make, what actions they're going to take inside the game, right? So a very quick example would be, we're about to, go inside a cave, right? What would you like to do? And a lot of games, especially video games or games that we know, they give you multiple options. In a tabletop role-playing game, like an open-ended one like this, it's up to the player to decide, well, I want to, light a torch to see what's going on. Well, I think it's pretty sketchy. I'm going to head out first. I want to scale the wall. I want to just rush in without, lighting anything up because I don't want anybody to see me. I want to move around stealthily. So all of this is allowed, and the role of the dungeon master then is to rein in everybody's creativity and move it more towards or more along the narrative that has already been set. right? And on the bottom right here, you can see a screenshot from Dragon Age Origins, which is one of my favorite sort of modern day video games. It's also a role playing game, set very much in the Dungeons and Dragons lore. But the cool thing about a lot of these video RPGs is that they all draw on mechanics and tropes and stories from classic role playing um, games like Dungeons and Dragons, right? So the idea of making the player the center of that entire experience and letting them feel immersed and letting them feel in charge of what's going on. So here, let's talk about a concept called player agency. So taking the concept of agency and really placing it at the center of a gaming experience. So there are three components to player agency. The first thing is that the player has control over their character's decision. Now, this seems very straightforward, very elementary, right? But in order for you to feel control over your character's decision, there's a lot of really conscious decision making that has to go in, right? You are letting the player decide or make decisions based on what they think might be best for them. And that's actually from a designer's point of view, you're letting go of a lot of the control that you might have otherwise. So that's actually a pretty big step for those of us who are designing these experiences. The second thing is that those decisions have consequences within the game world. What you're trying to do inside the game, what those decisions you're trying to make will end up, they might end up causing a ripple effect over the rest of the game. They might have a material impact over what is happening immediately in front of them. If I make a decision to open a treasure chest, there better be something in it for me, because otherwise, if I see other treasure chests scattered across the rest of the game, I'm not incentivized, I'm not compelled to do it, right? If I see that there's a leveling up system for me to spend points on, and I am increasing my points in my magic abilities, I better see these magic abilities, increase in power when I use them next, right? So these decisions have consequences within the game world. Other things might be how I talk to another character would influence how the rest of the game might actually end up panning out. So that's the second thing. Now, the third and final thing is that the player has enough information to anticipate what those consequences might be before making them. This all sounds pretty straightforward again, but it kind of goes. All of these kind of go quite hand in hand, right? In order for me to want to make those decisions, I need to know that they will matter. In order for me to know that they will matter, I need to see that information being fed back to me first, right? The more I'm talking about this, hopefully the more you're getting that, we're not just talking about this from a game context. We're talking about this from an education context as well, or for any learning experience for that matter, right? The concept of player agency ports very easily over to student agency, learner agency, and all of those other adjacent realms, because this is really a very universal concept, right? Think about if we're not a player, we're a student, for example. We want to feel as students, as learners, that we have control over what we are actually doing, right? We want to feel control over the learning path that is ahead of us. We want to know that the decisions that we make, what we're actually doing, whether it's exercises, games, activities, or whatnot, experiments, they need to somehow matter, and not like in a 20 years down the line, we might have calculus kind of concept, right? It is that immediate source of feedback that really keeps that flow going, that really keeps the player immersed, um, that ultimately, if we are able to replicate, will keep the students invested as well. So that's the concept of player agency. So let's talk a little bit about how we build agency. And I'll show a couple of examples of how we've managed to do it. And yes, we've also been able to do that online over the past couple of years. The first thing that I also want to mention is that we predominantly operate tabletop analog experiences, right? But as the pandemic has obviously affected learning in general, we've also been thinking about how to replicate that analog experience even in an online or virtual setting. So here are some experiments that we've tried to create. The feedback we've gotten has been quite successful. So here we go. So the first one here is it's actually an ESL program that we've been doing for a local school. Uh, two classes, primary 3 and 4 and primary 5 and 6. So ESL, a weekly program. And here, this particular context, we're actually introducing elements of storytelling or story writing, right? So in this particular context, we're talking about setting, right? So where is a story set? Now, in our previous experience, we understand that asking students to write an entire story from scratch, particularly when their base language level is not that high, is actually quite overwhelming. So what we do is we create a set of game-like activities to help facilitate them through that process. This is a digital game board, looks pretty sophisticated. It's just on Google Slides. And this is a setting of a cave. You can see the different icons there. What we're trying to do is we're going to have each kid roll the dice that is in their learning pack at home to move their character forward. And together, we're going to build that cave. So based on the icon that they've landed on, right? Let's say they've landed on the treasure bag icon. On the back end, what we actually have is a question bank of things that we want to ask the students in terms of building up that setting. So if they land on the treasure chest, treasure bag icon, we might ask them, how many gold coins do you see scattered around the cave? So they will give us an answer. And what we are actually also doing on the back end is we're writing a story out live on the fly for them. So once the game has been finished, the next slide is the story. Then the kids get that immediate sense of, wow, my input matters, that this is the story that we've created as a class. They read it out. And without asking, one of the students was drawing a picture of the map or of the cave as he was listening to it on the fly because he was so engrossed in that experience. That was pretty cool. Another example is from a program that we've been running for K2, 3 kindergarten students called Food Heroes. This is our second quest called Nutrition Adventures. It's really talking about macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, right? Pretty complex concepts for 5 to 6-year-olds, how food helps our different body parts. So we've created a story. We've created an adventure. We're helping a panda protagonist go through multiple challenges, all culinary-based challenges, and learning about how the types of macronutrients that the different types of foods that we're encountering on this mysterious island are going to help us on the adventure, on the quest to find Panda's long-lost master phoenix, who you can see on the right side of the screen. Spoiler alert. So the entirety is, kids at the top of each class, they're asking, oh, can we go and try to find Master Phoenix already? Let's get to class immediately. They don't want to leave class. They're so sad when the story is ending because they're so engrossed in the story. And most importantly, they remember all of the different academic concepts that we're teaching inside. They're able to explain to you now, a 5-year-old is able to explain to us what a carbohydrate is and what types of foods are beneficial to different body parts like our eyes, our brains, and whatnot. So, again, we build fun first, we build an immersive story first, we attach all of these academic learnings and concepts to it. One more called Junior Writing Adventures, as you can see here, spanning 3 different age groups, right? So this is a story-driven creative writing program. Couple of examples, we have done this successfully online. So using more of a role-playing game type of experience, as you can see on the bottom right, all of these we're making use of free-to-use resources because the most important thing is to generate that narrative for our students to go along. But on the top left, that is what, let's face it, our parents and teachers want to see is the writing side, the output, right? The deliverables. We have quest journals where we are having episode-specific and plot-specific writing prompts for them to practice writing and elaborating on the encounters that they've had over the course of the story, the people that they've met, the battles that they've been in, but putting to use different types of writing techniques, sort of like onomatopoeias, right? Like descriptive writing, dialogue writing concepts. And that is where we're able to get a gauge of where they're at in terms of that overall sort of writing development. And you can see here are the kids in an in-person setting with their physical printed questionals, and they're pretty hyped. So, all of these are examples from how we build agency as the core part of what we do, right? As the anchor of our learning experiences. And so I promised that we would get back to play, learn, and grow. So here it is. Why do we gamify learning? There are three things. The first part is the play. So we know that our kids look forward to class every single week, right? And the coolest thing is they ask for more homework. In one of our writing programs over the summer, I remember this very clearly. One of the kids was so engrossed in the story, he finished the writing prompt, writing assignments in like 5 minutes. Everybody else was still doing it. And he was like, can I do more? Can I write more? Can I do more homework? Kids want to do more of the story in class, and they would rather have homework to do because they want to go more in depth in the story in class. So we know that the kids are engrossed, and therefore they are asking to learn more even without them consciously being aware of that. The second of play, learn, grow is obviously the learn part. And that goes back to the academic side of things, right? So academic development is actually accessible. We design for these curriculum objectives inside. All of the interactions that we have are meant to elicit particular types of skills. So where it's writing, we're able to get a gauge for how well they're able to use those concepts in practice, whether it's nutrition and food related concepts. They're able to explain to us through the story, through explaining to other characters in the story, how it all fits together. So the learning part is absolutely core to what we're trying to do as well. And the last part, of course, is the growth aspect. This is the 21st century skills where more and more of us are learning more about and hearing more about the 6 C's, right? The skills beyond just rote learning, beyond just mechanical learning, that we need to use to thrive in this more creative, more unpredictable environments. So in all of these game-like contexts, because the kids are making decisions for themselves, they have the inputs to decide what type of actions they are taking. These are all growth areas and growth aspects. So we're also developing the whole person development and assessment criteria to go with the academic side. And of course, all of that is anchored in the agency, in the narrative and plot-based, game-based adventures and games that I just shared with you all. So we have learn, we have grow, and obviously we have play. And the best thing to encapsulate all of this is actually a quote by Albert Einstein himself. He says, creativity is intelligence having fun. That's pretty cool. We have intelligence, which is what we've always wanted to build in our kids. But in order to unlock that higher order of creativity and all the adjacent 21st century skills, the fun part is what unlocks all of that. So that's about it from me today. I'm Vince. I'm the founder and CEO of Press Start Academy. Here are our contact details. We would love to see you at some point in the future so we can go on awesome adventures together with you and your kids. Thank you very much.